Spring 1945, Central Europe. The war is almost over. But no one on the ground knows that yet. The air smells of damp earth and burned fuel. Villages lie hollowed out by months of retreat. Telephone lines hang dead from shattered poles. German road signs point to cities that no longer exist as commands. Somewhere in the distance, artillery rumbles, not advancing, not retreating, just firing out of habit. On a narrow road choked with abandoned vehicles, a single American officer stands still. His uniform is dusty. His men are few, far too few. Ahead of him, spread across fields and tree lines, are thousands of German soldiers, armed, organized, and waiting. By every rule of war, this moment should end quickly. By every calculation of force, it should end badly. Yet the American officer does not order a retreat. He does not call for artillery. He does not raise his weapon. Instead, he steps forward. What happens next will not be decided by firepower or numbers, but by something far more fragile: belief. In the final weeks of World War II, as the German army collapses inward, one U.S. officer will discover that confidence, projected at exactly the right moment, can move entire formations without a single shot being fired. And once the bluff begins, there will be no turning back. By the spring of 1945, the German war machine no longer resembled the force that had once swept across Europe. On paper, the Wehrmacht still fielded millions of men. In reality, it was an army unraveling from the inside out. The Eastern Front had collapsed under relentless Soviet pressure. Entire German formations vanished into encirclement or surrender. Cities like Königsberg and Breslau were cut off and crushed. To the west, American and British armies pushed steadily across the Rhine, shattering what remained of Germany's industrial heartland. The Luftwaffe was largely absent from the skies. Fuel was scarce. Ammunition scarcer still. But the most important collapse was psychological. German soldiers in 1945 were no longer fighting for victory. They were fighting for survival, and increasingly, for the right enemy to surrender to. American captivity meant food, medical care, and a chance to go home. Soviet captivity meant something far darker, fueled by years of propaganda and brutal reality. This fear fractured German command structures. Orders from Berlin arrived late, if at all. Officers disappeared. Units became clusters of men following whoever seemed confident enough to lead them through the chaos. Rank still mattered, but certainty mattered more. The U.S. Army understood this shift. American doctrine in late 1944 and 1945 emphasized momentum, pressure, and psychological dominance. Armored columns drove deep into German territory, bypassing resistance when possible. Loudspeakers broadcast surrender appeals. Patrols exaggerated their strength deliberately. The goal was not always to destroy the enemy. It was to convince him the war was already lost. Junior officers found themselves making decisions far beyond their rank. Lieutenants negotiated surrenders. Captains accepted entire battalion-sized capitulations. The battlefield had become fluid, unpredictable, and deeply human. It was within this collapsing landscape, where authority was as fragile as morale, that one American officer would step into a vacuum of command. Ahead of him stood not a unified army, but thousands of men waiting for someone to tell them what came next. And unknowingly, they were about to believe the wrong man. Across the shattered villages and crumbling roads of Western Germany, the lines between front and rear had blurred. Supply convoys moved cautiously through streets littered with debris. Soldiers scavenged abandoned positions for food, water, or weapons. The once formidable German divisions were now patchworks, men from different units pressed together, officers missing or replaced by those barely trained. Communications were chaotic. Radio networks jammed, lines cut, and couriers intercepted. In many pockets, German troops had no idea whether they faced advancing Americans, Soviets, or retreating comrades. Rumors traveled faster than official orders. The war is over, some whispered. Others clung to the hope that a counterattack would restore order. In the confusion, authority was a precious commodity. Soldiers followed those who appeared confident, regardless of rank or uniform. American forces exploited this chaos. Tactical deception became a force multiplier. Small reconnaissance units would appear as if they were entire brigades. Loudspeakers blared demands for surrender from one hilltop, while artillery crews simulated massive bombardments elsewhere. Even a handful of troops could convince an entire German garrison that resistance was hopeless. Within this environment, a single officer, sometimes a lieutenant, sometimes a captain, could command influence far beyond his numbers. The combination of German uncertainty, psychological stress, and American ingenuity created moments where an individual could alter the course of events without firing a single shot. In late April 1945, as the Reich crumbled under pressure from east and west, one such moment was about to unfold. A lone American lieutenant, facing thousands of German troops, would soon demonstrate that warfare was as much a battle of perception as of firepower. And in the quiet that followed, the stage was set for a bluff that would reverberate across the battlefield. The men of both sides were exhausted. Months of combat had eroded discipline, hope, and resolve. German soldiers trudged through bombed-out villages, often without food or clean water for days. Each night, the threat of Allied artillery or air raids lingered like a shadow. American troops, though better supplied, were equally drained by constant marches and skirmishes. Amid this exhaustion, human psychology became decisive. Fear and uncertainty shaped decisions as much as rifles or tanks. Soldiers craved leadership, someone to tell them what was safe, what was dangerous, what to do next. For the German troops, the looming presence of an American officer on their road, confidently asserting authority, disrupted their perception of the battlefield. What was a small unit appeared in their minds to be a formidable force. Leadership in late-war Europe had evolved. Rank no longer guaranteed obedience, perception did. A lieutenant projecting calm, decisiveness, and authority could convince hundreds, even thousands, to follow instructions they might otherwise reject. The U.S. Army trained officers to exploit this, emphasizing the value of confidence, presence, and decisiveness. Our American lieutenant understood this intuitively. He didn't need reinforcements or heavy weapons. His movements, posture, and voice were enough to shape reality for the Germans. By controlling perception, he assumed the mantle of authority where no one else could. The German soldiers facing him were disoriented. Without clear orders and fatigued by months of retreat, their cohesion was fragile. Thousands of men, armed but leaderless, looked to the officer for cues that he deliberately manipulated. Each hesitant glance, each moment of silence, reinforced the illusion of strength. The enemy's own fears and assumptions became tools in his hands. The Germans' mental state, a mix of panic, self-preservation, and uncertainty, created the perfect environment for a single American officer to impose control over what should have been an overwhelming numerical disadvantage. The battlefield had become a theater of the mind. In the final weeks of the war, psychological warfare was as crucial as artillery or tanks. Propaganda, rumor, and staged maneuvers were tools used to bend the enemy's perception. Our American officer exploited this expertly. Every step he took, every order he gave, was calculated to amplify the Germans' sense of imminent defeat. He understood that fear, once seated, could cascade through ranks faster than bullets. He relied on what military strategists call force illusion, making a small unit appear larger, a bluff presented with absolute confidence. By controlling what the enemy could see and hear, he made thousands of soldiers doubt their own numerical advantage. In this context, courage was contagious, but so too was doubt. Tactical positioning reinforced the bluff. The lieutenant placed his men along key vantage points, using natural terrain to suggest strength. Vehicles were angled to appear numerous. Rifles were fired sporadically to simulate continuous engagement. Every visual and auditory cue was deliberately staged. The Germans, interpreting the environment through the lens of fear, accepted the deception as reality. This approach required patience and precision. One misstep, a misplaced vehicle, an exposed soldier, a hesitant order, could shatter the illusion and provoke immediate attack. Yet the lieutenant remained calm, maintaining a rhythm that convinced the enemy of his overwhelming presence. For the German soldiers, the choice to engage or surrender was not only tactical but moral. Each man weighed the risk of combat against survival, the likelihood of punishment, and the futility of resistance. By presenting strength where there was none, the American officer forced an ethical dilemma. Fighting would likely be meaningless and deadly. Surrender, though humiliating, offered life. By the time he spoke, the decision had almost made itself. The battlefield had shifted from a contest of arms to a contest of will. The lieutenant's understanding of human nature and circumstance turned numerical inferiority into strategic dominance. In this delicate balance of fear, perception, and morality, the stage was now set for the moment that would decide everything. The morning sun broke over the shattered fields of western Germany, casting long shadows across abandoned vehicles and scorched earth. Silence dominated, punctuated only by the occasional clatter of equipment or distant artillery. Thousands of German soldiers, spread across ridges and farm roads, waited. They expected confrontation, resistance, perhaps even blood. The American lieutenant advanced deliberately. His small group of men moved in formation, rifles slung, eyes scanning, posture confident. Each step was measured, each gesture controlled. He did not shout commands, his presence alone conveyed authority. To the Germans observing from nearby hedgerows and windows, this was not a handful of soldiers. It was a disciplined battalion poised for engagement. He approached the first German positions, hands raised in a signal of temporary truce. His voice, calm and steady, carried over the tense silence. He issued precise instructions: withdrawal from certain areas, surrender of weapons, compliance with movement orders. Every word reinforced the illusion of overwhelming power. The Germans, already uncertain, hesitated. Officers looked at one another, attempting to verify their assumptions. Without clear orders from higher command and fatigued from weeks of retreat, the decision fell not to logic but perception. And perception, in this moment, favored the American officer. By midday, isolated engagements that might have escalated into firefights had ceased. German units began to reposition, following the lieutenant's guidance, believing they were complying with an unavoidable superior force. The bluff was working. Every movement, every calculated pause strengthened the illusion. It was here, in the quiet tension of a battlefield awaiting chaos, that the balance of power shifted. Numbers no longer mattered. Strategy had given way to psychology. By mid-afternoon, the German soldiers' uncertainty had reached a breaking point. Scouts reported what they believed were additional American reinforcements moving along parallel roads, though in reality, they were small patrols deliberately positioned to exaggerate strength. From their vantage points, the Germans could see organized columns, hear controlled bursts of rifle fire, and sense a level of coordination that simply did not exist. The lieutenant did not issue threats. He let the illusion do the work. His calm demeanor, unwavering eye contact, and precise instructions convinced German officers that compliance was the only rational choice. Slowly, one unit after another laid down weapons, forming lines in the open fields under American oversight. Even the senior German officers, who might have challenged his authority, found themselves psychologically outmaneuvered. The fear of Soviet retribution, combined with the perception of overwhelming American power, created a perfect storm. Orders to resist evaporated under the weight of doubt. By late afternoon, entire formations, numbering in the thousands, had capitulated. Not a single shot had been fired in earnest. The battlefield, once tense with the potential for massive carnage, now stood silent except for the faint rustle of surrendering troops. The lieutenant moved among them, documenting compliance, guiding movements, ensuring no misinterpretation. This was not luck. It was the precise application of psychological insight, tactical positioning, and human understanding. The bluff had succeeded. A single officer, far outnumbered, had reshaped the battlefield entirely through perception. As evening approached, the surrendered German soldiers were gathered and accounted for. The American officer, small in number but immense in effect, had turned what could have been a deadly engagement into a decisive, bloodless victory. The consequences of this moment would ripple beyond the field, affecting strategy, morale, and the very conduct of surrender in the closing days of the war. The surrender was officially recorded in reports filed by the U.S. command that evening. Hundreds, then thousands, of German soldiers had complied without major incident. Captured weapons included rifles, machine guns, and a handful of light artillery pieces, all rendered harmless not by battle, but by the perception of overwhelming force. U.S. officers documented the event meticulously. After action, reports noted the unusual circumstances. One lieutenant, commanding only a fraction of a company, had overseen the capitulation of multiple German units. Intelligence officers analyzed the incident and confirmed the psychological and tactical elements at play. It was a textbook example of late-war surrender psychology in Germany. The impact on surrounding German formations was immediate. Word spread quickly. Americans are everywhere. They are stronger than we believed. Units that might have resisted fled or surrendered preemptively. The ripple effect extended several miles, easing the advance of additional American forces with minimal combat. Local civilians, who had observed the event from windows and rooftops, noted the strange absence of violence. Villages that might have become battlefields instead witnessed an orderly occupation. Food and medical aid were distributed quickly to those German soldiers who had surrendered, reinforcing the perception that compliance was both safe and rational. From a strategic perspective, this incident became a case study in the use of small forces to create disproportionate results. The lieutenant's success demonstrated that the final weeks of the war were as much about psychology and leadership as they were about firepower. Commanders took note, incorporating similar tactics in subsequent engagements. In the broader theater of operations, the surrender contributed to a faster, less costly American advance. It exemplified how chaos, uncertainty, and fear could be leveraged by a single capable officer to achieve results that might have required entire battalions in earlier phases of the conflict. The battlefield was quiet, yet the ramifications were profound. The war was ending not with overwhelming slaughter, but with the subtle assertion of authority, perception, and confidence. The surrender set a precedent for the closing days of World War II in Europe. As American and Allied forces pressed deeper into Germany, similar instances of bluff, negotiation, and psychological leverage became increasingly common. Commanders observed that German soldiers, isolated and demoralized, were often more willing to surrender to officers who projected authority and confidence than to overwhelming firepower alone. Reports from adjacent units confirmed the ripple effect. Entire divisions, hearing of the successful capitulation, questioned the point of further resistance. In many cases, surrendering troops provided critical intelligence on troop dispositions, supply routes and minefields, information that saved countless lives and accelerated the Allied advance. The lieutenant's actions, though localized, exemplified this broader trend. For the American officer himself, recognition came quietly. Superiors praised his composure and tactical insight, but the victory was measured not in medals, but in the lives preserved. Historians later noted that this incident highlighted an often overlooked aspect of military operations: the power of perception, persuasion, and timing. The battlefield was no longer solely a contest of weapons. It had become a contest of mind and morale. The German units involved faced internal reckoning. Officers who surrendered, once confident in victory, now had to justify their decisions to higher command, if any command still existed. Soldiers had to reconcile humiliation with survival, and communities braced for the incoming occupation forces. The psychological weight of surrender lingered far longer than the physical presence of American troops. The success of the bluff also demonstrated a crucial truth of late-war Europe. Traditional metrics of strength, troop numbers, artillery, and armor could be nullified by chaos, miscommunication, and fear. A well-positioned, confident, and perceptive officer could exert influence far beyond his nominal rank or force size. By the time evening fell, the battlefield had transformed. What began as a potentially catastrophic confrontation ended as a demonstration of intellect and psychological mastery. The lieutenant had rewritten the rules of engagement, proving that in the final days of the war, courage and perception could be more decisive than firepower. In the end, the story of a single American lieutenant convincing thousands of German soldiers to surrender without a shot fired stands as a testament to the power of human perception in warfare. It reminds us that battles are not won solely through firepower, but through understanding the minds of those we face. The officer's success relied on timing, confidence, and a deep comprehension of fear and morale, elements that no weapon could replicate. This episode illustrates a broader truth about World War II's final days. The collapse of the German war effort was as psychological as it was material. Troops, exhausted and disoriented, were susceptible to the authority projected by a determined leader. In a war defined by massive armies and industrial might, a single individual, equipped with presence and intellect, could reshape events and save lives. It also serves as a reminder of the human element in warfare. Decisions made in moments of stress, uncertainty, and moral tension have consequences far beyond the battlefield. The surrender may have spared countless men on both sides, but it also left lingering questions about choice, duty, and survival in the face of overwhelming circumstances. Ultimately, the lieutenant's bluff was not just a clever maneuver. It was a reflection of the profound influence one person can wield when circumstances align. As the guns fell silent across Europe, such moments echoed the reality that wars are fought not only with steel and bullets, but with courage, insight, and the unyielding understanding of what drives human behavior. The battlefield was still, yet history remembers that day, a single officer, thousands of enemies, and the extraordinary power of perception over force. A lesson in strategy, psychology, and the enduring complexity of human conflict.